Okay, guys, I don't have quite as much to say about Dante Rossetti as I did about his sister Christina. I guess mainly because I don't like his poetry as much. Dante was very different from Christina. We talked about that Christina in her adolescence became really dedicated to religious pursuits. As a matter of fact, she gave up most of the pleasure she had on earth because she felt morally convicted to be involved in charities and making sure that she was adhering to her strict religious beliefs. Dante never came to share that with Christina. He was very devoted to painting. He was probably more famous for his art than he was for his poetry. And many of his contemporaries even said that he painted his poetry and he put into poetry his art. So he very much intermingled and combined poetry and art. He was part of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which was a group of poets who sought to bring realism and truth back to art. And if you Google Dante Rossetti, you're going to see a lot of things about that pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. He was very involved in that. That was part of his claim to fame. I did put on here a really weird story, and I put a link to it if you want to read more about it. It's not a very long article. But if you've ever seen, and I should have put it on this slideshow, but probably the most famous painting that Dante Rossetti's wife was the muse for, which a muse, if you don't know what that is like a person who's a figure or an inspiration for one's art. And so Dante married a model who was the muse for the famous painting Ophelia from Hamlet. You can look it up. And she had red hair. And after Dante married her, she became strictly his muse. He used her for all of his paintings. She died from an opium overdose, which was, relatively common back then. And of course, she was buried. And years later, I can't remember how many years later, but I think it says how many in the article, he actually, and I cannot imagine doing this to your own wife, had his wife's body exhumed because when she was buried, he buried the books of poetry that he had been writing during her sickness with her. He felt guilty because he had attended more to his poetry than he had attended to her. And so he buried that poetry with her. Well, years later, he became rather bored with painting, and he decided he wanted to return to poetry. But he knew that some of his best poems had been buried with this wife. And so he paid basically criminals to exhume her body, and he got that book back, had it sterilized, but it's really creepy. And he ended up actually publishing the poems that were in that book. So, interesting story about Dante Rossetti. That's probably, after I told you that, and especially if you read the article, the only thing you will remember, possibly after this class is over, about him. Uh-oh. Okay. The Blessed Damozel, his poem that you read this week, is a narrative poem that combines physical love and spirituality. Now, this poem was lightly based on Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Raven. Most of you have probably read The Raven in high school or in college. And he loosely based it on The Raven, based on the idea of true love separated by death. If you've read The Raven, you know that the speaker is still alive and he is in deep grief, deep psychological torture over the death of his love, Lenore. And so he asked the Raven pointed questions about whether he'll be reunited with Lenore, whether Lenore is in heaven, those kinds of things. And so with that same idea, Dante Rossetti wrote this poem not just about the lover left behind on earth after his beautiful love has died and gone to heaven, but it is also from her perspective. He paints the picture both literally and not literally, because he also painted this painting that's on the slide as a representation of his poem years later when he was asked to. but he painted a picture of this Blessed Damozel in heaven, standing on a wall, trying to gaze through the gulf that separates heaven and earth, and searching for and pining for her lover, asking God, praying that he will soon be back with her. One confusing detail of this poem is point of view. Point of view is third person omniscient at the very beginning until stanza 4, and the point of view switches to the first person perspective of this lover who is seeing his Blessed Damozel in heaven gazing down. And strangely enough, heaven is visible in the poem to the lover, but it doesn't seem that the damozel can see him from heaven. There is no, I put here, there's a typo, no real turning point in the poem. At the end of the poem, it still ends with the damozel in heaven and the lover on earth. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is this saying about love? What is he trying to say about its power and its importance? That even the joy and the beauty of heaven is not enough for the damozel not to miss her lover. I want to talk about a few passages in the poem. It is a rather long poem, and it is probably not the type of poem that most of us enjoy the most. It's very, I guess for lack of a better word, mushy, romantic, and it's not the type of poem that most of us probably like the best. But anyway, I want to point out a few things about this poem. The very beginning, of course, lines 1 through 18 are in third person omniscient, and then we know that in that fourth stanza we switch back over to first person, because he says, surely she leaned o'er me, her hair fell all about my face. And so she has been gone for 10 years. And we have to ask ourselves, it says, albeit to them she left, her day had counted as 10 years. Does that mean she's been actually gone from earth 10 years, or one day that felt like 10 years? Because, and if you're familiar, even in the Bible it says that time in heaven is not the same as time on earth. She watches and she tries to, and I'm on line 49, if you can skip down to there. It says, from the fixed place of heaven she saw time like a pulse shake fierce. Through all the worlds her gaze still strove within the gulf to pierce its path. And now she spoke as when the stars sang in their spheres. And so we've gone from daytime to night. It says in the next stanza, the sun was gone now, the curled moon was like a little feather, fluttering far down the gulf, and now she spoke through still weather. Her voice was like the voice the stars had when they sang together. Ah, sweet, even now in that bird's song strove not her accents there, fain to be hearkened when those bells possessed the midday air, strove not her steps to reach my side down all the echoing stair. I wish that he were come to me, for he will come, she said. Have I not prayed in heaven, on earth? Lord, Lord, has he not prayed? Are not two prayers of perfect strength, and shall I feel afraid? And so she reveals that she's praying for him to come to heaven, and she assumes that he is praying for that as well. And so she asks God questions about when her lover will be there. You know, when can I be reunited with my lover? Then even on the very last page of the poem, and if I'm looking at the bottom of the poem, I'm going to go up 2 stanzas. She says, there will I ask of Christ the Lord, thus much for him and me, only to live as once on earth, with love only to be, as then a while forever now together, I and he. So she plans to ask of Christ that she and her lover can be reunited and experience the type of earthly love they experienced here on earth, but forever in heaven. And of course, most people believe that in heaven, earthly love is not the same, but she prays that it will be. So even the joy and the splendor of heaven, in Rossetti's view, cannot erase the earthly love, the physical love that she and her lover have experienced. So in that last question, what might Rossetti be saying about love and its power and importance? He gives it utmost importance. He thinks that physical earthly love may be strong enough even to be missed and be felt in heaven.